In 1933, a 10-year-old girl wrote to the federal government about her mother. Her request was painfully simple. She did not want the same thing to happen to anyone else. Her mother had used an eyelash and eyebrow dye sold in beauty salons. Then she lost her sight. The product was called Lash Lure. This was not a bottle smuggled through a back alley. It came in a stylish Art Deco box. It promised a lasting effect that mascara and eyebrow pencil could not provide. A salon could buy it, a beautician could apply it. A customer could sit beneath the lights, close her eyes, and trust that the product beside her mirror belonged there. The federal agency that received the girl's letter knew Lash Lure was dangerous. It knew women had suffered serious eye injuries. Its own history records at least one confirmed case of permanent blindness. But under the federal law then in force, cosmetics were outside its authority. The government could warn people. It could display the package. It could tell the story. It could not remove Lash Lure from sale simply because the cosmetic was dangerous. That is the contradiction at the center of this story. The poison was visible. The injuries were documented. The product could still be sold. Lash Lure was not the only product to exploit that gap. A depilatory promised to make unwanted hair disappear, while its active ingredient poisoned the body. X-ray operators turned a medical discovery into a beauty treatment, long before the full cost of radiation injury arrived. Together, these products became evidence in a campaign to rewrite American consumer law. But even that campaign was not enough. Congress argued for 5 years. The bill stalled. Then, in 1937, a sweet liquid medicine killed more than 100 people. Only after that disaster did the law finally move. To understand how Lash Lure stayed on the market, we have to return to 1906. That year, the United States passed the Pure Food and Drugs Act. It was a major reform. It prohibited interstate commerce in adulterated and misbranded foods and drugs. It gave federal officials a way to act against false labels and contaminated products in those categories. The category controlled federal authority. A bottle sold as a drug entered the law through one door. A jar sold as a cosmetic could stand outside it. The 1906 Act gave the federal agency no authority over cosmetics. It also left major gaps around devices, advertising, dangerous drugs, and the burden required to prove fraud. This did not mean every state court, lawsuit, or local official was powerless. It meant the Federal Food and Drug Agency could not treat a dangerous cosmetic the way it could treat an adulterated food or a misbranded drug. Harm alone did not pull the product into its jurisdiction. Beauty companies had a growing market and a persuasive setting. The salon looked modern. Its equipment looked scientific. Rows of bottles, heated dryers, metal curlers, white coats, mirrors, and carefully arranged counters created an atmosphere of expertise. A customer did not need to understand chemistry. The room itself supplied reassurance. Advertising supplied the rest. Products promised beauty without effort, hair without gray, skin without marks, and bodies without unwanted hair. The promise was not merely to look different. It was to enter a newer, cleaner, more controlled future. The legal system, however, still sorted danger by the label on the package. If the package fell into the wrong category, the federal regulator could collect complaints and study injuries while the product remained beyond its reach. Lash Lure made that abstract weakness painfully easy to see. 3 years before the girl's letter, another beauty product entered the market. Koremlu was a depilatory, a cream meant to remove unwanted body hair. It arrived in the spring of 1930 and was presented as a modern breakthrough. According to FDA's historical account, more than 120,000 jars were sold within a year. The sales pitch hid the real mechanism. Koremlu contained thallium acetate. Thallium compounds had been used as rodent poison. In the cream, the chemical could be absorbed through the skin and travel far beyond the place where it was applied. The desired effect, hair loss, was inseparable from the poison's ability to disrupt the body. Doctors began reporting what they saw. A 1931 medical report traced a young woman's marked hair loss to Koremlu cream. Another report, published the next year, described severe thallium intoxication caused by the depilatory. Eye specialists documented optic nerve injury and loss of sight after prolonged use. These were not rumors added decades later. They were clinical warnings published while the product was still part of the beauty market. FDA's later history records one particularly severe reported case. A 26-year-old woman lost her teeth, her eyesight, her ability to walk, and her job. That account should not be treated as the outcome of every jar. It shows the outer edge of a danger already visible in contemporary medical literature. Koremlu's manufacturer was eventually overwhelmed by damage suits. That outcome shows the difference between punishment after injury and prevention before it. Litigation could accumulate after women were harmed. It could destroy a company. It could not give the federal agency an authority that Congress had never placed in the 1906 statute. The product's promise and its poison were bound together. Koremlu worked by making hair fall out. The advertisement called that convenience. The medical reports called it thallium poisoning. Lash Lure brought the same contradiction closer to the eye. It was an aniline, or coal tar-based dye for eyelashes and eyebrows. It promised color that would last longer than the ordinary pencil or mascara. It was applied where a mistake had almost no margin, on the lashes, brows, and skin surrounding the eye. FDA's account says the product was not tested for safety and did not disclose its ingredients. Customers could see the polished box and the salon mirror. They could not see the toxic chemistry that would touch their eyelids. The injuries included severe irritation, the loss of eyebrows and eyelashes, impaired vision, and blindness. One confirmed permanent blindness case became part of the agency's official history. The letter from the victim's daughter turned an enforcement problem into a human one. A child understood the danger, the agency understood the danger. The law still did not give that agency power over the cosmetic. The title needs a qualification. The government could not ban Lash Lure under the Federal Food and Drug Authority created in 1906 merely because it was a dangerous cosmetic. That statement does not erase state law, lawsuits, or every possible remedy. It describes the federal hole that FDA officials were trying to close. The agency chose exposure as a substitute for enforcement. If it could not seize every dangerous object, it could show those objects to the public. If it could not compel a company to prove safety before sale, it could place the package beside the evidence of what happened after use. That choice also changed the role of a complaint letter. On its own, a letter could be filed as one family's tragedy. Beside the Lash Lure box, it became an explanation of the law's failure. The object showed how the product entered an ordinary salon. The testimony showed what followed. The absence of enforcement showed why another customer could still meet the same package. Public education was not equal to removal, but it could turn private harm into pressure that Congress could not dismiss as an abstraction. That strategy changed Lash Lure from an isolated scandal into an argument. The box no longer represented only one reckless formula. It represented a category of products that federal law had failed to include. At the same time, another promise of modern beauty was being delivered by a machine. Soon after X-rays were discovered, doctors and operators noticed that radiation could make hair fall out. That observation led to medical epilation and then to cosmetic possibilities. Unwanted facial hair could be treated without shaving, wax, or a depilatory cream. The machine carried a special authority. It belonged to the new century. It could see through flesh. Its dials and tubes suggested measurement, precision, and control. Yet early radiation practice developed before today's understanding of dose and delayed injury. The visible result could arrive quickly. Some of the worst consequences could take years. Medical literature recorded those consequences. Physicians described X-ray dermatitis and tissue damage. In 1934, a doctor reported a sarcoma of the cheek after X-ray treatment for facial hair. Later reports documented skin cancers after X-ray epilation. These cases do not prove that every customer developed a tumor. They show that a beauty service could deliver an exposure whose risk was deeper and longer than the immediate result suggested. X-ray depilation belongs in this story because it shared the same sales language as Koremlu and Lash Lure. All three offered technology as reassurance. The jar, the dye, and the machine asked the customer to trust a modern process she could not independently evaluate. They also exposed different parts of the regulatory gap. Was the product a cosmetic, a drug, or a device? Was the danger in the label, the ingredient, or the machine itself? The 1906 law had been built for an earlier marketplace. By the 1930s, the marketplace had learned how to move faster than its categories. FDA officials decided to make those gaps physical. In 1933, the agency's chief education officer, Ruth DeForest Lamb, and chief inspector George Larrick assembled a traveling exhibit. It contained roughly 100 dangerous, deceptive, or worthless products that the agency lacked adequate power to remove. There were fraudulent medicines, deceptive food packages, radioactive tonics, useless devices, and dangerous cosmetics. Lash Lure sat among them. Each object carried two stories. One was the promise printed on its package. The other was the injury, deception, or legal loophole that allowed it to remain in commerce. A reporter accompanied First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt through the exhibit and supplied the name that endured, the American Chamber of Horrors. It was dramatic language, but the display was not built from invented monsters. It was built from products people could buy. The exhibit gave the agency a form of power it did possess. It could educate, it could invite reporters, it could let a package and a victim's account occupy the same room. It could show Congress that the old law's failures were not technical details. They had bodies attached to them. The method was deliberately simple. Visitors did not need to master a statute. They could look from the claim on a package to the harm connected with it, then learn why federal officials had been unable to intervene sooner. The display converted jurisdiction into cause and effect, promise, purchase, injury, legal gap. Its force came from the fact that every strange-looking object had already passed through the real marketplace. Ruth DeForest Lamb extended the campaign in a book. Consumer groups and journalists joined the push. A reform bill entered the Senate in 1933. What followed was not a quick victory. Industry opposition and political resistance kept the measure moving, changing, and stalling for 5 years. The Chamber of Horrors made the case vivid. It did not make the case irresistible. Dangerous cosmetics had exposed the weakness. Publicity had given that weakness a name. Congress still had not closed it. In 1937, a Tennessee drug company developed a liquid version of sulfanilamide. Sulfanilamide was an effective new medicine, but the company needed a solvent to turn it into a sweet liquid that children and other patients could swallow. It used diethylene glycol, a poisonous chemical used in antifreeze. The formulation was tested for taste and appearance, not for toxicity. At the time, federal law did not require a new drug to be proven safe before it was sold. The product was called elixir sulfanilamide. Shipments went out in September. Death reports followed. Federal inspectors raced to recover bottles distributed across the country. More than 100 people died, many of them children. Credible historical sources give totals of 105 or 107, so the honest statement is more than 100. The law's response to the company revealed how narrow the existing authority was. Officials could act on the word elixir because a legal elixir was expected to contain alcohol. The deadly solvent itself had reached patients without a federal requirement for pre-market safety testing. The label violation offered a handle. It did not change the fact that the system had permitted an untested toxic formulation to be sold. This disaster did what 5 years of exhibits, testimony, injuries, and advocacy had not. It broke the legislative stalemate. FDA's history says the public outcry reshaped the drug provisions and propelled the bill through Congress. Elixir sulfanilamide was the final catalyst, not the only cause. The sequence matters. Lash Lure, Koremlu, dangerous devices, deceptive foods, and worthless drugs had already built the argument for a broader law. The Chamber of Horrors had carried that argument to the public. The deaths in 1937 forced Congress to decide what prevention was worth before the next bottle was sold. President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act on June 25, 1938. The new law brought cosmetics and medical devices under federal control. It strengthened rules against adulteration and misbranding, authorized factory inspections and injunctions, and required new drugs to be shown safe before they could enter the market. Those powers were not identical. New drugs received a pre-market safety requirement. Cosmetics came under federal adulteration and misbranding law, which gave the agency tools to act against dangerous or deceptively labeled products after they entered commerce. The act did not create general FDA pre-market approval for cosmetics. Even today, cosmetic products and ingredients generally do not require FDA approval before sale, with a specific exception for color additives. The first cosmetic seizures under the new law included improved versions of lash and brow dyes. The category that had once stood outside the statute was finally inside it. That did not make every cosmetic safe, and it did not end every regulatory gap. It changed what the federal government could do when a cosmetic injured the public. Now returned to the salon chair in 1933. A woman closes her eyes. A dye is mixed beside her. The package looks modern, ordinary, and legal. Somewhere else, her daughter will later ask the government to stop the same thing from happening to another family. The agency could preserve the box. It could record the injury. It could build an exhibit and give reporters a tour. What it could not do, under the authority Congress had written in 1906, was remove the danger simply because it was a dangerous cosmetic. Lash Lure did not single-handedly create the modern FDA. No one product did. Its importance is sharper than that. It made a legal category visible through one injured person. Koremlu showed how a beauty promise could carry poison through the skin. X-ray depilation showed how a machine could sell certainty before its delayed harm was understood. The Chamber of Horrors arranged those failures into a public argument. Elixir sulfanilamide finally turned that argument into legislative momentum. The eyelash dye the government could not ban became evidence for a law that redrew the boundary of government itself.